Autoimmune disorders and neurodivergence. What's the relationship? A lot of folks who are neurodivergent have a variety of interrelated health conditions, ranging from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome to POTS to chronic fatigue to mast cell disorders. But what about autoimmunity? If you look at the scientific literature, you'll see that some of the earliest studies linking autism and autoimmunity were actually focused on the moms of autistic kiddos. Moms of kids with autism are more likely to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, regardless of whether she herself is also on the spectrum. Some of the autoimmune diseases that pop up most frequently include celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, and hypothyroidism. Other studies have found that if either mom or dad has an autoimmune disease, the child has an increased propensity for autism, although that likelihood seems higher when it's coming in particular from mom's side. Later studies began looking at autoimmunity in autism itself, also finding links, along with immune dysregulation in general, like increased propensity for allergies and asthma. Now, you may also be wondering if autoimmunity is associated with conditions like ADHD, and in fact, there do also seem to be links suggesting shared underlying factors in autoimmunity that are underlying both autism, ADHD, and the autoimmune diseases. Now, autoimmune disorders also appear to occur more frequently in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and hypermobility spectrum disorders, which is probably no huge surprise to most of you who are familiar with those conditions, since MCAS is such a common co-occurring condition. But the autoimmune conditions that seem to pop up most frequently in association with Ehlers-Danlos, again, rheumatoid arthritis is a big one, but also stuff like lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, thyroid disorders, and celiac disease as well. Now, although you may have heard about autoimmune diseases before, and you may even suffer from one, you may nevertheless be wondering what exactly is an autoimmune disease and why do they pop up so often in people with mast cell problems. Now, in my course on clinical neuroscience, I teach a whole section on autoimmune diseases that target the nervous system. And while in this video we're interested in autoimmune diseases that target more than just the nervous system, the mechanisms of action that I teach my students are basically the same. And just like my students, I'm going to give you a little crash course in how the immune system works. First off, it's important to understand that an autoimmune disease is when the body's immune system is attacking some part of self and damaging and/or functionally impairing it somehow. Now, traditionally, it was believed that this had to occur through what we call an autoantibody-mediated mechanism, although that dogma is currently sort of in flux, and the truth is probably a lot more nuanced, but I'll leave that for a later video. Now, one type of immune cell in your body, known as a B cell, is responsible for the production of antibodies, including autoantibodies, aka antibodies to self. The B cell produces and releases antibodies wherever they are in the local tissue, or more widely if they happen to enter into the bloodstream or the lymphatic system. If there's something that fits that antibody, kind of like a lock and key system, whether it's a protein on an invading pathogen like influenza or a protein on a rogue tumor cell, that antibody marks that cell for destruction. Now, your body is always producing new B cells, which have the potential to produce a whole range of different antibodies that could potentially target a wide variety of different invading pathogens and cancer cells. Unfortunately, a small percentage of B cells, just by sheer chance, produce autoantibodies. Again, antibodies to self. Now, most of the time, these self-reactive B cells are weeded out of the population while they're still in the bone marrow and before they can potentially do damage. But there's a subset of them that nevertheless make it out into your body. Now, this is normal. And all of us have a small percentage of B cells at any given time that are potentially self-reactive. Now, if that's the case, you may then be wondering, well, how are we not all developing new autoimmune diseases all the time? And the answer to that is your body's second defense against autoimmunity, and that's known as peripheral tolerance. This is a mechanism that helps ensure that even with autoantibodies present, the majority of people will remain asymptomatic. Basically, this is the immune safeguard that tells your immune system to chill out despite the presence of autoantibodies. Now, peripheral tolerance is directly regulated by certain groups of T cells, which are another family of immune cells that are somewhat closely related to your B cells. And this is especially the case for a group of T cells known as T regulatory or Treg cells, which are super important in getting your immune system to chill the heck out. The more these Treg cells are active, the more chill your immune system is. Q, mast cells. If you happen to have a mast cell related disorder where you've got these little guys dumping a bunch of inflammatory molecules everywhere, these Treg cells don't get to do their all important job of telling the immune system to chill out. Also, there's some evidence that suggests that mast cells can actually interact with other T cells and B cells, helping to ramp up their immune response, and kind of like a pro-inflammatory thing. So what happens when your mast cells are chronically freaking out, suppressing your Treg cells, ramping up your other T cells and B cells, and then one of your B cells produces an autoantibody that didn't get weeded out in the bone marrow? Whammo, dramatically increased risk for developing an autoimmune disease. And worse still, a dramatically increased risk over time for developing multiple autoimmune diseases. For this reason, it's pretty common for folks with one autoimmune disease to develop additional ones. And it's also for this reason that people with mast cell disorders are far more likely to develop autoimmune disorders as well. Mast cell dysregulation is essentially a permissive force for developing autoimmunity, or in other words, it's kind of the last fail-safe between you and autoimmunity. You may have also heard that the majority of people with autoimmune diseases are female. Now, while there's a few autoimmune diseases that do occur more frequently in men, like Guillain-Barré syndrome, about 80% of all autoimmune patients are female. Now, there's likely a few different reasons for this, but one of the main ones is because estrogen stimulates the immune system and makes it more aggressive, while testosterone and progesterone help to calm it down. Other reasons may also involve genetics and the expression of a particular X-related gene known as ZIST, XIST, which when expressed, and is primarily expressed in females and typically turned off in males, when it is expressed, it seems to lead to a more aggressive immune system. So for instance, there was one study that tested this in mice, and they found that in a genetic line in which the female mice were more prone to developing a mouse version of lupus, when they turned the ZIST gene on in males within that line, those males also had an increased risk for developing the autoimmune disease, and they developed it at the same rates as the females did. So it's very likely that the ZIST gene in females helps to regulate the expression of a number of important immune-related genes, although research is still kind of early as to what exactly those genes are. Anyways, that's my take on the Immune System 101 and how, kind of in a nutshell, autoimmune diseases tend to happen. Why they also occur alongside mast cell disorders more frequently, which of course occur a lot more often in neurodivergent folks, and why they especially affect women in particular. So I hope you've enjoyed this little immunology lesson. Do let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thanks again for joining me down this week's science rabbit hole. And until next week,